waited for this moment through every twist of fate, for the day I'd find the one who makes the waiting worth the wait.
I got to know Wilma when I would go over to Bill's and Sue's. They had a basement in their apartment, and Bill was into electronics, which we were both working as electrical engineers.
She walked in with the morning sun, Wilma Jean, and my heart was done. Hair like silk and a laugh so clean, she turned the world into a movie scene. I tipped my hat, said, how'd you do? She laughed and said, I see right through. We danced all night by New Year's Eve. I had her heart and she had me. Wilma Jean, my light, my dream, the rhythm in my lifelong theme. From porch light kisses to a mountain scene, we build it all, me and Wilma Jean, my bride, my pride. With you I soared, with you I'd ride. A love so real, so rich, so keen. You gave me a life worth living, Wilma Jean.
And so over the course of 2 or 3 months, I got to know her, and we decided that we would start to date. I had bought a 1959 Pontiac Bonneville, which gave us a car and we traveled all through northern Michigan, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. On our dates, we parked on Lake Superior. It was a beautiful place. We dated for a number of months, and then in 1960, in March, she went with Mark back home to North Carolina. Stayed for a couple of months, actually stayed for about a month. I went down from Marquette. I drove down to pick up her and Mark. We came back to Michigan on the beginning of April. When we got into Marquette, I had a message from my manager who said there was an opening in Poughkeepsie. Well, the computer was going to be turned over to the Air Force, so most of us working on the computer was going to have to get relocated. So he said it was a good opportunity, and he knew that Wilma and I were planning to get married. So he recommended that if we got married, IBM would pay for us to go to Poughkeepsie, New York, which was a long distance. Unfortunately, the job said I had to be in Poughkeepsie on the 7th of April. So we decided that we were going to get married anyway. We didn't have anything. I had gone to the bank in Marquette and borrowed money to buy the wedding rings.
I've waited for this moment through every twist of fate, for the day I'd find the one who makes the waiting worth the wait. With you the world feels steady, with you the sky is true. So take my hand and never doubt I'll walk this life with
Which
you.
was kind of interesting in the fact that IBM back then was pretty well respected. I could walk in, say I wanted to borrow this for wedding rings, and they gave me a loan. Other than that, neither one of us had any money. But we decided that we would get married. We got married on the 7th, or on the 6th, actually, of April. Went to the Justice of the Peace. Sue and Bill, Sue, best man, maid of honor, had a slight reception in the afternoon, had some friends that we had from IBM.
I promise to be here come what may. Through every changing season I will never walk away. No matter where life leads us, my heart belongs to you. Forever starts the moment I say I do.
That evening, I got on a plane and went to Poughkeepsie. Wilma moved into my apartment with Mark. So I started the job with IBM in 1960 on April the 8th. Wilma and Sue were still in Marquette, with Bill working for IBM at the computer side. In 1961, IBM was just getting in to transistorize large computer systems. And so they needed the people in Poughkeepsie because most of the people that were working for IBM were working on punch cards and readers and that type of thing. They didn't have, they had a lot of electrical engineers designing computers, but they didn't have a lot of people to build them and maintain them. So that was going to be my job. But the thing that I had to do, because we didn't have anything, I had a car, and that was it. So the first thing I had to do was to find an apartment. And fortunately, IBM would let us work as much overtime as we wanted. And so I was able to work all the overtime, save the money, and have enough money before Wilma came to Poughkeepsie to where we could purchase furniture to furnish an apartment. I found an apartment in Wappingers Falls, which was a little town just south of Poughkeepsie, which again, Wilma and I were not big city people. It was totally unfurnished, had to be painted, but it had 2 bedrooms, 2 baths. It was a very comfortable apartment. When about a month and a half after I left, or like it must have been in June, July, Wilma and came from Marquette when Bill and Sue were going on vacation and drove from Marquette to New York, where his mother lived. So that allowed Wilma to drive the car along with them, and they all came to upstate New York. Then talking to Wilma, we made arrangements that I would meet her across the Hudson River in a small diner, and she could drive the car to there. So it worked good. She and Mark arrived in Poughkeepsie. I picked him up across the Hudson River. We drove across the bridge, up the hill into Poughkeepsie. We then went to Wappingers Falls, where we stayed in a motel for a long time, because we had to get the apartment ready to move in. I had saved enough money to where we could go to a furniture store and buy furniture to outfit the apartment. We bought bunk beds for Mark. We bought all of our furniture. Refrigerator, everything that we needed to start the apartment. It was a nice area because it was a kind of a compound. We lived in a 4-unit apartment, but the whole area was basically IBM, because IBM was hiring so many people that we had an awful lot of people around us who all had children and all were approximately our same age. We had engineers on one end of the building, a young couple that worked in the research lab. On the other couple, on the other end of the unit, we had a couple named Carol and Norman. They were from New York City. His father was a baker in New York City. They were an older couple, but they spent a lot of time coming up and visiting, and his mother kind of took Mark under her wing. She made a lot of clothes, she did a lot of knitting, and so we really got oriented into married life. It was an easy time. Mark started school in Poughkeepsie, and his school was right in the backyard almost. All you had to do was go out the back door, go up the hill, and his grade school was there. At the same time, Wilma was able to make an awful lot of friends. because I say there was an awful lot of young people there. We went on vacation in 1961 to North Carolina to see Homer and her family, and then went on to Florida. So we had a good time on vacation. When we came back to Poughkeepsie, we found that Wilma was pregnant.
You were music in a silent, drifting song, a place where I belong, where everything felt strong. We raised a house of laughter and watched the children grow,
which was really made us very happy. We were established now, we had a good job, and we were living a pretty good life. Lisa was born in November 17th, 1961. It was a very happy time for us. We were happy that we had a girl, so now we had a boy and a girl. And so we decided that you couldn't get anything else, so those were the only children that we were going to have. My mother was still living in Michigan by herself. We had taken Mark to visit her before I left Michigan. So she was very happy. He was a good child, and she had a garden, got a chance to be with her in the garden and get to know my mother. So, my mother never got to know Lisa. My mother died in 1962, in January of 1962. But the other grandparents, Homer in North Carolina, got to know because he did an awful lot of taking care of Mark. Unfortunately, Inez died early. Wilma's great-grandfather was George Washington West. He was born in 1868 in North Carolina, died in Cherokee, North Carolina, which was an Indian reservation very close to Wilma's home, which everyone, all the kids really enjoyed the Indian reservation when they would go visit Homer in Andrews, North Carolina. Her great-grandmother was Julia Tatham, born in 1869. Both Tatham and her grandmother, who was Rebecca Postel, who was born in 1881, are very common names in Andrews. That they both have large histories living in the Smoky Mountains. And in 1962, Homer decided to come visit us in New York. Well, Homer didn't like to fly on airplanes, so he took the train, which was good. So by that time, Lisa had just started to walk. Mark was like 6, 7 years old. So we all got in a car from Poughkeepsie, which was about 70 miles north of New York City. So he came in on the train from North Carolina into what they call Penn Station. Obviously, in New York City, it was very busy. So we had a plan. We'll on one entrance down to the train, to the tracks. I was on the other. But Homer was an individual.
Homer. Homer wouldn't take a plane, so he rolled up on a train from Carolina to the city where the subways ain't so pretty. First time in old New York, said the skyline felt too tall. We turned around for just a moment, Homer vanished in the hall.
When he got into the train station, he immediately got out of the train and went outside at Penn Station, and we missed him. This was to happen a number of times through Homer's travels. So now we're in the middle of New York City. The kids are crying, "Where's Homer?" And we can't find him.
That night we found him laughing with a cabbie on the town. They'd been drinking brown bag whiskey, took the scenic way around. He said this city ain't so bad with a twinkle in his eye. But Homer on vacation is a rolling apple pie. Where's Homer? Where's
So we gave up. We got the conductor, went all through the train, knew that he wasn't on the train, and we went back to Poughkeepsie. So sure enough, that evening, Homer comes walking up the front. He's got a taxi that has brought him to Poughkeepsie, to our apartment. Both he and the cab driver had had a couple of drinks, because Homer was a very personal person. But the kids were so happy to see him that we didn't really care. In the meantime, we had been on the phones all the time with Sue in Marquette, because she knew him just like we did, that he was tough to travel. But he really had a great time with us. We had room for him in the apartment. He was there when Mark started school. So you'll see pictures of him and Mark. And Mark obviously was his favorite. He also had a grandchild called Lisa, but she was really too young to really participate much. Homer stayed with us for a couple of weeks, and then we decided that we would put him on a plane to go visit Aunt Sue, which was fine. We could get him on a plane. Unfortunately, the plane stopped in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Homer gets off the plane, and now it's evening time. We're on the phone with Sue, wondering where's Homer. So all night long, we were worried about Homer. But sure enough, the next morning, he had gotten the milk train to Marquette and showed up at Sue's house. This went on a number of times through our history. But Sue, they had a good time with Homer, Mary and Brian. Then later on, Bill's job was this same thing that happened to me. The computer got turned over to the Air Force. They maintained it. And so he then transferred to Kingston, New York, which was another plant which was about 30 miles north of Poughkeepsie. They came to Kingston and then bought a house in Woodstock, New York. Woodstock is a fairly famous place, or was back then, where they had the big concert with all the hippies. And they moved into their house shortly after the big concert, which didn't really happen in Woodstock. It happened on a farm outside of Woodstock, but Woodstock got all the publicity. And it was a great little town. They lived there for a number of years. And what was nice was that Wilma could travel from Poughkeepsie to Kingston to visit Sue. So for the first time with the two families, Bill and Sue and Wilma and I, really had a relationship probably more than anyone had had in a long time. I can remember going from when the first trip I took to Athens, Greece. I met, again, I stayed overnight. Finally I got a hotel, I was tired, and the next morning I got up and got back on the train and headed for what they call Brindisi, Italy, where you catch the ferry over to Greece. And there was a couple of girls in that from Australia in the compartment. So I sat down and talked to them, and we talked, and so when it came time when we got to Brindisi, we had to get off and transfer to the ferry. And they were funny because I got behind, and they were starting to board the ferry, and they were up high, and they saw me down there, and they told the guy, he said, "Hey, we want that guy down there. He's with us." And so, so I got up, went with them, and we ended up going overnight to Athens. And people like that. I always traveled. I was old, so I had to travel first class. I couldn't get a second class, and so you could always go back into the second class car because that's where all the kids were and the young people that were you know, they knew where everything was. You know, where most people at my age who would go to Europe would get a tour guide and then be on a tour and that type of thing. I did all mine and never had a tour guide. And
Use the locals.
yeah. So those are my fun trips.
Let's take a look upstairs.
Okay. The problem with the damn trains is that they need a little repair work. I can't do it anymore because I got neuropathy in my fingers and my fingers won't work. So when you get this age, I worked an awful lot of hours. Wilma made a lot of friends in Poughkeepsie, but it wasn't the same as having family. Later on, in 1993, Mark had continued in grade school. Lisa was she was only 3 years old. But we'd gotten enough money that we decided we wanted to buy a house. So we went looking for a house and found one in Hyde Park, New York, which is actually north of Poughkeepsie, where FDR, Theodore Roosevelt, grew up.
House in 93, just two young hearts and a set of keys, an acre and a half with a birch tree swing. Felt like we had everything. High Park neighbors way below. Driveways cracked and the grass would grow. $21,000 down. We were the luckiest kids in town. Our first house, a little start of wooden floors and borrowed hearts. She made that place a dream come true. With every wall and every room. Oh, our first house, it still rings loud. The place we built our vows around. Yeah, we didn't have much, just love and a couch, but we had it all in our first house.
It was a big tourist town. Well, we bought a nice house, paid $21,000, had 3 bedrooms, acre and a half lot with beautiful birch trees, and that was going to be our first house. So Mark and Lisa and Wilma and I moved into Hyde Park. I commuted from there into Poughkeepsie to work. That was 1993. Again, we weren't very rich. We couldn't, Wilma wanted carpeting, but we couldn't afford carpeting. It had beautiful wood floors. It was just a beautiful house. Beautiful landscaping, everything was beautiful. We had good neighbors. They were an older couple who again kind of adopted the kids. They had their grandmother living with them. And so it made it very easy for Wilma. She made friends there. She made friends with the wife of the builder of the house, which had a house. They lived in the house 2 doors away from us. And Wilma would go visit. Her last name was Germano. And they cut a trail through the trees to the house. The unfortunate part was there was a black snake that decided he would live in the same area. And so Wilma would go running up to the house, and every now and then the snake would come out and scare her, but she enjoyed that. The neighbors had a swimming pool, which was good with the kids. Mark transferred school from Wappinger Falls up to Hyde Park. It was a nice area. We loved it. And it was our first house. Unfortunately, in 1964, Boulder decided to build a plant, or IBM decided to build a plant in Boulder, Colorado. I had gone to school there in the Air Force. I love Boulder. It's a great place. So I told my manager that I wanted to go to Boulder. And he said, fine. He had a job as the assistant to the plant manager. So I went home and told Wilma that I'd like to go to Boulder, Colorado. She said, I don't want to go to Colorado. I got a new house. Sue lives in Woodstock. I can go visit her. It really was a tough time for her. And I don't think that I appreciated it as much as I should have. Well, we talked about it, and we decided to take a house hunting trip to Boulder. So one day, we would fly out of JFK in New York to Boulder. Well, we didn't anticipate how long it would take to take the kids to Woodstock so Sue could take care of the kids, and then we drove into Poughkeepsie, or to New York. And we missed our flight. Unfortunately, the World's Fair was in New York that year, 1964. And so we had a great time visiting the World Fair. Disneyland was there. It was a great experience. So the next day, we went on to Boulder. When we got into Denver, we flew into Denver and drove to Boulder. Well, unfortunately, Boulder, on the eastern slope from the Rockies are beautiful, but it's almost a desert. There's very few trees, not very green at that time of the year. And Wilma didn't want to go to Boulder to start with, and so during that whole day, she cried. So that night, we decided we'd go back to Boulder, to New York. So we caught a late flight, got into New JFK, and drove up to Hyde Park through what they call the Taconic Parkway. So the Taconic Parkway is just loaded with trees. And so, yeah, it was probably the worst thing I could do because it was beautiful. It was nighttime, there wasn't much traffic. And we got home, and then the next morning we went and got the kids. And Wilma wanted to stay in New York. So for the next month, I would go into work. My manager would convince me to go to Boulder, and I'd go home at night, and she would convince me to stay in New York. So finally, my manager did something that you weren't supposed to do in IBM, but he said, go to Boulder, take the kids, and stay there until you decide what you want to do. So I convinced Wilma to go back and try again. So we took the kids this time, and we took a little different approach. We had a real estate agent, but we really didn't look for a house. We really wanted to see what Colorado was like. So we went up into the mountains. He took us all around to all the lakes and all the beautiful places. And then when we finished the last night, he took us to a little town outside of Boulder called Louisville, Colorado. Louisville had a restaurant that was world famous for their spaghetti. Unfortunately, we didn't know that. So she and I had a steak. We laughed about that for years because everybody else said, why didn't you have spaghetti? Which, after we went to Boulder, we spent an awful lot of time at the Blue Parrot in Louisville, which was not far from our house. Now she decided that we could go to Boulder. So in 1965, in the spring of '65, we sold our house for the same money we paid for it and went to Boulder. We waited until Mark got out of school. Lisa hadn't started school yet, so it was a good time to make the transition. In Boulder, again, we didn't want to live in Boulder, but we didn't have any place to live. So we ended up with a real estate agent who was also a builder. He had a house that we could rent on Denton Avenue, which was in Boulder, and easy to do. So we moved into the house and lived there for about 6 months while our house was being built. What we did was we kept looking for a place to build a house. We ended up about 5 miles east of Boulder. It was what it was called, they called it Davidson Mesa. And it was elevated significantly from Boulder. So when you went out of Boulder, it was pretty much uphill to Davidson Mesa. There, we ended up buying a 1 acre lot that was a hayfield on Ridge Road. Well, we had plans for our house, and we had wanted a split-level house, which gave us a little more room. Well, the people that lived on Davidson Mesa didn't want anyone to block their view because they had the whole back range of the Rocky Mountains. So one day, we got all the neighbors together out in the hayfield, presented our plans, and tried to convince the group that we could build our house there. Well, at that time, the leader of the group was a lady called Vondel Martin, who became a very, very good friend of ours. But she was concerned that our house would be tall enough that it would block the view of the people across the street. Well, finally we were able to convince her and the whole neighborhood that we would not block the view. Actually, the across the street was an empty lot, which would be built on 20 years later, but we convinced them that we could build. So we were then all set and started to build our house. Vondel lived up the road from us, and she lived on the other side of the road. That was one of the reasons that she was so conscious of the view. But her husband, they had come from Texas, and her husband had a welding shop, which he was a very good welder, and it really, in the long run, worked good, which I'll talk about later, because he was able to employ Mark and teach him how to weld. So we moved into our house in Boulder on Thanksgiving in 1965. My job, the Boulder plant was just being built, so we had rented facilities in Denver, and I had to commute to Denver for a year before we could move into the Boulder plant. But again, Boulder was a very friendly place. Wilma bowled. She played bridge. She really, once she got there, she realized that Boulder was a good place to live. Colorado was a good place to live. We were at 5,000 feet altitude. The air was clean. Denver had its smog problems, but Boulder was just beautiful. So when we moved into our house, Mark had gone to school in Boulder, and then when we moved into our house in 1965, he went to school at a grade school called Douglas, which again was very close to our house. Lisa started preschool and then would go on to a school next to Douglas and eventually went to Douglas. We stayed in Denver or in Boulder for 10 years. It was a wonderful time. We had good neighbors. One of our neighbors worked for Ball Brothers, which at that time was working on the space telescope. They had a son that was just about Mark's age, and there was all kinds of people in our area that were about the same age as Mark.